All right, let's dive right into this explainer and unpack one of the absolute most cynical, yet undeniably fascinating laws of power ever written. Today, we're taking a microscopic look at Law 2 from the famous book, The 48 Laws of Power. It's a concept that completely challenges the very foundation of how we view our personal and professional networks. We aren't just going to read this law today, we're going to deconstruct it, dig into the hidden incentive structures behind it, and see exactly why human beings behave the way they do when the stakes are incredibly high.
Here's the law, straight up. Never put too much trust in friends. Learn how to use enemies. I mean, just hearing that out loud instantly creates this massive cognitive dissonance, doesn't it? It completely upends our deepest beliefs about who we can actually rely on. Think about it, from a very young age, we are taught to lean on our friends, to build our circles based on emotional warmth and a shared history. But this law throws a massive wrench into that entire paradigm. It suggests that the people closest to you might actually be your biggest strategic blind spot.
So it forces us to ask a really foundational question. Is trust actually about emotional closeness, or is it really about predictable behavior? Throughout this explainer, we're going to completely shatter the assumption that emotional loyalty equals reliability. We tend to conflate the two. We think, oh, I've known this person for 10 years, therefore they're going to deliver perfectly on this high-stakes project. But as we're about to see, the actual mechanics of human behavior suggest that emotional closeness might actually degrade performance over time.
Section 1. Unpacking Incentive Structures.
There is this stark, almost uncomfortable contrast between the entitlement of a friend and the highly motivated caution of an enemy. Let's break it down. When someone considers you a close friend, they kind of just assume their loyalty is a given. And because of that assumed loyalty, over time, their actual effort can start to slip. They expect forgiveness. They expect leniency if they mess up, which can slowly lead to carelessness. Now, flip that and look at a rival or an enemy. An enemy knows for a fact they have zero emotional safety net. They have to prove their value to gain even an ounce of trust. They're incredibly cautious because of the reputation risk. And honestly, they're frequently highly motivated to completely outperform expectations just to secure their position.
It all boils down to a concept called risk asymmetry. This is literally the engine running this entire law. Emotional closeness actively reduces accountability pressure, while emotional distance increases performance pressure. Performance, at the end of the day, is a function of accountability and incentive. It is not determined by whatever relationship label you happen to slap on it. When you assign a really crucial task to a friend, you are often inadvertently removing the exact tension required for peak performance.
Section 2. The Psychological Underlayer. First up, we've got familiarity bias, or what you might call the familiarity decay model. It perfectly explains why our friends so often risk complacency. You see, when you are deeply familiar with someone, there's this implicit assumption of forgiveness. If a friend misses a deadline, their brain goes, "Oh, it's fine, we're buddies, they'll totally understand." Because they expect that leniency, the level of scrutiny they apply to their own work just naturally drops. And over time, effort and precision decay.
But flip that around and you get what's known as incentive sharpening. A lack of trust actually forces higher performance. An enemy, or even just a bitter rival, totally expects heavy scrutiny from you. They know you are watching them like a hawk, basically waiting for them to fail. Because of this, they are forced into this intense level of risk discipline. Their reputation has to be aggressively earned through tangible reliability, not just assumed because you guys had a great time at dinner a few years ago.
And this brilliantly illustrates the core psychological truth at the heart of this entire dynamic. Comfort lowers performance accountability, while tension increases it. We all love to think that we do our absolute best work when we are perfectly comfortable, sipping coffee and surrounded by our best friends. But the data and the psychological models strongly suggest otherwise. We actually perform best when we have something to prove, when there is a healthy, undeniable level of tension and scrutiny.
If we actually stop looking at relationships as just these warm, emotional bonds and start viewing them as incentive enforcement systems, we see a totally predictable cascade effect. Step 1 is the relationship type, right? Which immediately dictates step 2, the expectation level. Do they expect leniency or do they expect intense scrutiny? Well, that leads directly to step 3, the accountability pressure they feel, which ultimately defines step 4, the final reliability outcome. It's a bit of a paradox, really. High emotional trust often leads to low enforcement pressure, which ironically leads to a much lower reliability outcome when the stakes are high.
Section 3. Real-world power dynamics. This law actually transfers seamlessly across so many different high-stakes domains. Take business, for example. When teams get a little too comfortable and start acting like family, accountability almost inevitably drops and performance decays. Or look at cybersecurity. The absolute biggest vulnerability isn't always the shadowy external hacker. It's often the trusted internal user whose unchecked familiar access accidentally turns into an insider threat. In the military, experienced commanders know that overly familiar units can suffer from enforcement decay and lose vital discipline. Even in the psychology of chess, an underestimated opponent increases the tension, forcing the player to play with extreme, laser-focused precision. The pattern is clear. Long-term familiarity consistently reduces vigilance, no matter what field you're in.
Section 4. The Modern Trust System.
Now, before we go totally off the deep end, firing all our friends, treating everyone with intense paranoia, and suddenly hiring our worst enemies, we need to take a step back. Taking Law 2 way too literally creates what strategists call a collapse condition. It has major blind spots. First, it assumes enemies are always disciplined, which, let's be real, simply isn't true. Misaligned incentives will make an enemy fail just as fast as a friend. Second, it completely ignores emotional loyalty, which can actually be a massive stabilizing force during a real crisis. Third, if you act purely on naive opportunism, you seriously risk destroying your most valuable long-term alliances. It highly overemphasizes suspicion at the direct cost of coordination.
Modern organizational psychology offers us a really critical correction here. The real variable you should care about isn't friend versus enemy. The secret is that you must evaluate the behavior, not the relationship label. The label of friend or enemy is honestly not predictive on its own. Friends can absolutely outperform rivals, provided you manage them properly. It all comes down to ruthlessly evaluating their actual behavior and ensuring their incentives are deeply aligned with your overall goals.
The absolutely strongest, most resilient systems out there don't operate on this rigid binary logic of trust friends, use enemies. Instead, they beautifully combine trust with verification. You can absolutely have highly performing friends on your team, provided you maintain that crucial accountability pressure. You just cannot let your emotional bias dictate your trust allocation. You have to verify the work, maintain the standards, and ensure the incentive structure remains razor sharp, regardless of how much you happen to like the person sitting across from you.
Which leaves us with one final, incredibly critical thought to chew on. As you look at your own teams, your own projects, and your personal networks, ask yourself, are you evaluating your relationships based on comfortable emotional labels or by their actual incentive-based reliability? Where in your life might you be suffering right now from familiarity decay? And most importantly, how can you introduce a healthy, productive dose of accountability and verification into those systems today? Think about that as you navigate your own strategic environments.